We come into the world equipped with an array of possibilities and limitations. Those possibilities and limitations are expressed most particularly in our physical form. The fact that we have a specific kind of embodied form that allows us to do certain things and that also doesn't allow us to do certain other things. Lao Tzu has pointed out that it's the space inside a pot that makes the pot worthwhile. And what he means by that is that those things that limit you give you as much form and possibility as those things that enable you. What that means more broadly is the fact that you come to a given circumstance with a set of possibilities and a set of limitations. It's that allows you to impose form on what you encounter. So that the whole notion of form is attendant in some peculiar way that we don't really understand yet on the necessity of limitation. And I think the best way to understand that, or to begin to understand that, is to give some consideration to the notion of a game. So for example, if you're playing chess, there's a virtually unlimited number of things you can't do, and only a very narrow number of things that you can do. Yet when you're playing chess, the arbitrary limitations that are imposed on each piece don't seem to be unfair in any sort of cosmic sense. They seem to be part of the structure that enables you to actually play the game. Without the imposition of those rules, which are of course relatively arbitrary in their structure, there wouldn't be a game at all. Now, it's clear that for human beings, games and fantasy, for that matter, shade up into reality, so that the game structures that we engage in and the fantasy structures that we use to undergird our stories and our pretend play, say when we're children, shade imperceptibly into real life. We play games because there's something about games that make them deeply analogous to what we do in day-to-day situations. And that means the observation that the rules of a game actually make the game possible is an observation that's broadly applicable to consideration of your own limitation. Some of those limitations and possibilities take the form of emotions and motivations. And we know, I think, incontrovertibly, regardless of the claims of social scientists who are more relativist in their orientation, that human beings come into the world with a standard set of biological predispositions, emotions and motivations. And furthermore, I think we know that it's the fact of those shared emotions and motivations that allow us to communicate at all. And then imagine further that a consequence of that lengthy process of interpersonal negotiation is the emergence of a tremendously complicated game. And not one that's arbitrary, because the game has to have certain rules in order for it to be played at all. So for example, we know that even with rats, if rats, they like to engage in rough and tumble play. And if you put two rats together, juvenile rats, one rat almost always dominates the other. It only takes about a 10% gain in weight on the part of one rat for it to be pretty much stably dominant. And it's always the subordinate rat that introduces play or asks for play. But it turns out that even among rats, if the dominant rat pins or obtains victory over the subordinate rat, more than 70% of the time, the subordinate rat will no longer play. So then you could imagine likewise that if you're going to play a game with some other person, whether it's a game of fantasy or the actual chance to engage in some cooperative real-world activity, unless that person allows you a certain amount of space for the manifestation of your own emotional and motivational needs, you're not going to play the game with them, right? You're going to look for another game. And that means that there's a certain set of difficult to describe constraints for all of you on games that you're willing to play before you'll look for another game.